Hello chess players, this is Chess Suriname and welcome to another chess educational video. In this video, we'll cover Rook Endgames where the pawn is on the 6th rank. Alright, here it is why to play and I urge you to try this out for yourself. Please pause the video. Okay, we'll start off with the wrong answers of course. And the wrong answer here would be to play c7. If you play c7 here, it is a draw and an immediate draw. The king will go to c8, of course. And now you will have a problem with side checks. So for example, if you play your rook to b2, we can give a check here and then it transposes into a rook against rook endgame, which is a draw of course, assuming your opponent doesn't blunder. So what if the rook defends the 6th rank? Then you'll just camp, then black will just camp on the last file. And here black has a very nice tactic. So if you ever play king to c6 here we can just play rook to f6, and after this capture it is a stalemate. So here c7 would be a wrong move to play. Alright, so instead of playing c7 and blundering and drawing this endgame, here you would need to play your rook to g7. And you'll see why soon. And let's assume black will stay on this rank. For example, rook to e8. Then you give this check. And after king goes to c8, then you play your rook to a7. You're threatening to play here and checkmate. And what if the king comes here to defend this square? Then we just play c7. The king must go to c8. Rook a8. And here we can capture the rook and get a queen and win this endgame. Okay, so you know what happens if the king goes to c8. What will happen if the rook goes to a8? Now we will change the order. So here we play rook to a7, check, king goes to b8, and now you give c7 check, king goes to c8, and then the same thing I've told you a moment before. So yeah, this is how you win this endgame. So again, you play a rook to g7. And what will happen if the rook goes away from the 8th rank? If the rook goes, for example, here, then you just give checkmate. And if the rook stays on the 8th rank, then you give this check. If the king comes here, you go here. And then you do this combination where you emerge with the queen. And if he goes to a8, then you give this check again. And now you win here. Alright, to the next position. Alright, now it's a bit different. Now the rook is on h7 instead of the 8th rank. And now it's black to play. So I'll flip the board for you guys. And close, of course. I'll flip the board for you. And here, remember the pawn goes this side. And here it is black to play. How would you defend in this position? Alright, now it's black to play. What would you play in this position to keep a draw? So here, you need to play your rook to b7 and give this check. And if the pawn takes, then it's a stalemate. And what happens if the king just moves away? If the king goes here, you play your rook to, let's say, f7. And if the checks is given, then you just stay here, and this is a draw. If the king goes to h6, then you give this check. And you can keep checking here actually. So yeah, this is a drawn endgame. Okay, to the third one. Alright, so now the pawn is a center pawn, so it's a queen's pawn now. You can also win this endgame. So here you need to play so here white needs to play. How would you continue in this situation? Here are several moves you can play, but the most straightforward one is rook to a1. Here you're threatening to give checkmate. If the king goes to b8, you give check on b1. And here black has two choices. If he goes here, then we do it like in the previous puzzle. We give this check, and after king to d8, you give this check, and here you can win the rook and can promote to a queen. So here you can win. And if the king goes to a8, you play king to c7. And after king to c7, you're threatening to promote, and you're also threatening checkmate. So for example, black plays this check here, then you can just play d7. And after king to a6, you can play your king to c8, and now you can promote. So here he has to play rook to h8, then you just promote to a queen. He takes, you take, and then you win this rook endgame. So as you can see, if your pawn is a center pawn, you can also win this endgame. So what if it's a knight pawn? What if the pawn is on the B line or on the G line? So in this position, it is actually a draw. And for example, white plays rook to g7. If you try the same maneuver, it won't work. And after this check, for example, check here, you can't force this pawn to move. In fact, if you force this pawn to move, you lose here because the king is attacking your rook, and I can remove your defender, in this case your king. And after king moves, you lose this endgame actually. So if the pawn is a B pawn, then it's a draw. Black, of course, has to defend this position, and he can defend this position by positioning his king in front of the pawn, and the rook remains on the 8th rank, and this is a draw. All right, what if we have two knight pawns? All right, so here we have two knight pawns, and please pause the video and try this out for yourself. Here you can win this endgame. Okay, here you have several ways of doing it. b5 is correct, and what is also correct is rook to g6. So here you need to play rook to g6. If the rook moves, then you play b7, and the rook will just stay on the 8th rank. And here, and then you play your rook to your pawn to b5, and the idea is to play rook to c6. And after rook to c6, we'll force the exchange with the rook. So for example, if the rook goes to b8, then we force the exchange, and this is a one pawn endgame where you play your king to a7, and then you just push and promote. So if you have two knight pawns, you can also win this. This is also true for, yeah. So if you have two knight pawns, you can also win this. Yeah, let's check out, instead of playing rook to g6, what if you played b5, which is also winning. If you here play b5, the rook will move, and now you play your rook to g6. So it's the same idea, but a different move order. So here you play b7, and then you play rook to c6, and you force the exchange of these pawns. Alright, that's it for this video. I hope you've learned something new. I will cover more rook endgames, but this is a good place to start. So yeah, thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.